So what exactly is the flip-flop method? If you're like me, I had no idea what that was until I had the chance to experience it in February of 2021 at Winter Strong. In this episode, we sit down with Andy Moeckel, who is the man behind the flip-flop method. We learn not only what it is, but where the tradition came from. And we also learn how he has overcome adversity in order to build what is now a thriving business. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I'm your host, Scott Volquartsen. This week's guest has an incredible story. He has what started by his grandfather and turned into a unique family business. It takes him all over the country. I would like to welcome to the show Andy Moeckel, better known to some as the flip-flop guy. How are you doing, Andy?
I'm doing good. I'm doing really good.
I want to say first, thanks for coming here. This is going to be a great weekend. We're going to have a lot of fun. So a little bit, I guess let's just start with the background. How did you get into, or where did the flip-flop method, first, what is it and where did it come from?
Excuse me. The flip-flop method, where did it come from? So it originated in, as far as I know and my knowledge of it, it originated in West Marin, California. Most people do not recognize California as a wild game cooking state. A cooking state, maybe, but probably not wild game. And my grandfather was a California fish and game warden. That was his profession after he got out of World War II. He was on the Navy ships in the Pacific. And he became a game warden. He'd go around ranch to ranch and obviously always talking and working with the ranchers and the hunters, everybody. At one of the ranches, and we've narrowed it down, it is actually the Portuguese. It was a Portuguese family, and they would take lamb legs off of their sheep that they were raising, cut off the whole entire back ham, and then they'd just grill it and put on whatever seasonings. And my grandpa was just like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. We have to try this with venison. So him and my grandmother started doing it, and eventually I want to say it was around 61. He ended up coming up with a marinade that was just like absolutely 100% the best thing that he had ever tried. And that's what I bottle and sell now. But what the flip-flop is you take the entire back leg of a deer. So what I'll do, because I'm usually backpack hunting, I'll turn the deer on its back after I skin out the hind legs, and I'll cut in all the way down to the ball joint, and I'll cut all the way up to the back and then back around. And then I'll just cut in all the way down to the ball joint on both sides until I can pop that whole entire leg off. And I'll cut it about an inch below the knee so I have a handle. And that'll be one whole meal for, 30 to 40 people, depending on the size of the deer. But yeah, like a 15 to 20 pound leg will usually feed 30 to 40 people.
Well, and the cool thing is I was first introduced to it at Winter Strong 2 down in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And besides the fact the way it tasted was just amazing, but like the community aspect of everybody standing around a fire, getting together. Like I've told a lot of different people that you almost have to experience it to really see like what it is and how much fun it is and what almost like a social activity that it can become.
Well, one thing that I've found too, so I've only been cooking them. My dad handed it down to me on my 25th birthday. He gave me the recipe card and how to make it, gave me the knife, and he said, all right, cool. Now you get to do it and I don't have to do it anymore. So kind of passed it on. And one thing that I've found in the history of every time that I've cooked it and watched it cook for, the 36 years of my life, the community that it brings, right? The level of engagement and involvement of everybody around it is unlike anything that I've ever seen, in the open fire cooking community or, in grilling community anywhere. And what's crazy about it is what I think it does is it it literally unlocks some sort of primal nature in us as human beings. Here's this 15-pound piece of meat on an open flame, and it is just, searing and coming off, within a minute of it actually hitting the fire. And I've watched vegans, and I've said this on so many podcasts. I've watched vegans, vegetarians, like people that have been devout to their way of eating for decades be like, okay, I need to try this. It's pretty insane. And what's funny right now, and what's been funny for me for the last 4 years, and actually taking this on the road and introducing it outside of my family circle and our friends and the people around the community that have done it in Marin County and Fairfield, Vacaville area. The craziest part is like, so many people see it, they get really hyped up about it, but at the same time, like the video doesn't do it justice. Like, it does it justice. It gives it some hype. But so many people are like, man, I just don't believe the hype. And then they try it and they experience the collective experience of it, and they're blown away. And everyone is always like, this is so much further than the hype even can explain. Like, you can't explain the experience that comes out of this process.
Well, and that's what we experienced down in South Carolina. And that's, what we're going to do this weekend with our entire team. I'm excited to introduce them to it. And I want to get more into the challenges you faced as you launched the product. Mm-hmm. And, I know different things that even, well, let's just jump into that. I know, like, when you created the marinade and the sauce, I know it was a battle for you to be able to get it exactly the way you wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was an adventure in itself. And I want to say it seriously started in 2017. Now fast forward to 2020, I think, or maybe it was the end of, what are we in right now? 21?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the end of 2020 when I finally, like August 2020, I finally got a product that was like, oh my God, this is the right product. And then it went to market and on the shelf, or, for sale in a matter of months after that. But the buildup to get the product correct was extremely tedious. I mean, not only, and I was talking to Casey from Tacticalories about this morning. We were talking about bottled sauces, and he was bringing up botulism and what can happen if you're using fresh ingredients, bottling fresh ingredients, and then packaging it and sitting it on a shelf for months, which inevitably creates botulism in the bottle and then kills whoever eats it. It's like, that's terrible. You don't want that. So it was finding the right mixture of the ingredients that are available, freeze-dried ingredients or dehydrated ingredients, and making sure there is no botulism process. But on top of that, it was in the beginning vat mixing, and people would do samples and try to get it right. And every time, every bottle, there was no consistency from bottle to bottle because it's so thick. There's so much nutrients. There's so much seasonings and spices and herbs and everything in it that vats couldn't mix it accordingly. So you'd get like real thin bottles with kind of nothing in it, and then you get real thick bottles with way too much in it. And anyways, that was a whole long process in itself, which took a long time to actually finally get it right. But I'm glad that we did.
Yeah. And I've had it and it's amazing. And, and I want to shift gears a little bit and back up.
Yeah.
Because I've heard your story and I would love for our listeners to hear it, because
the evolution of myself.
Yes. The evolution of Andy into the flip-flop guy.
Yeah.
Because I think there's so many takeaways of lessons that can be learned, even stuff that we discussed before we, started recording about different things that people can learn, and, the challenges that you faced personally before you even got into the business part of it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, for me, there's like so many different layers to my life and things that I've done, and you can really start out. I was raised in a middle-class family. My dad swung a hammer and ran his own business. He's an Italian, and he's super stubborn and would never really hire any employees. So it was just him.
I can relate to that with a dad.
Right?
Very
right?
similar.
Yeah. And, he just worked for himself, and he was a phenomenal contractor, general contractor, and built amazing homes and amazing remodels and all kinds of stuff like that.
So before you go on, do you think he didn't want to hire people because he was afraid that it would bring down the quality?
Yeah.
Okay. 'Cause that's what my dad was always afraid of.
Oh yeah.
And
fast forward to me developing this product. I mean, there's a picture perfect, of the perfectionism of me making sure that this sauce has to be perfect, and accepting no substitute.
And it's funny how that works because a lot of my mindset was developed through, I didn't even realize I was being taught those lessons. Mm-hmm. But to this day, I'll do that. I'm like, obviously I learned that same stubbornness or, not willingness to quit until it was exactly right from my dad.
Yeah. And there's points where I almost gave up in the sauce development, where I was just like, this isn't going to work. I mean, at home, I could sit there and I could mix 5-gallon buckets because, let's be honest. I mean, everybody starts somewhere, and I started in 5-gallon buckets in my garage. And I was able to get it there, and then it was going to production that was the hang up. So I would just have to, because people would come by my house and they'd buy a quart or a pint because that's all I had available, and then buy quart or pint jars and no labels or anything like that. You just come by and pay me. And if I wasn't home, we had a little stash box out in the backyard, and people would come around my fence and go in my backyard and grab how many bottles and then leave the cash there. And, so it was
that's awesome.
It was a whole process. But so going back to my parents, and my mom worked at Safeway. Really quick side note before I lose this. So my parents just came up to Montana, and they spent a week with me up in Montana, which is where I live now. I moved out of California, thank God.
Smart move.
Yeah, seriously. And you talking about those mannerisms and picking up those things is so funny this week, watching my dad and then identifying so many of his characteristics in myself, which I've never discussed with him or talked to him about, but it's just so funny to sit there and be like, that's where I got that from. Oh, that's where I got that from. You know what I mean? So I just had a whole week of going over that with my dad. It was pretty fun.
And it's funny how that works because you have sayings that you learn from your parents, and you don't realize that not everybody else says them. And just the other day, my son said to me, he goes, I don't know what I said, but he said something to the effect of, I said that in school the other day, and I think you're the only one that says that. But I'm like, well, I don't know. I grew up with my dad always saying it. So
right. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to where I came from.
Yeah.
Marin County, California. My family's been out there for a lot of generations. My grandmother was born at the Point Reyes Lighthouse. A lot of people know Point Reyes because it's like a huge spectacle. They were one of the last lighthouse keeping families in Point Reyes. So my grandma's job every morning was wake up and go down there with acetone and spray the little mirrors on all the lighthouse lenses and make sure that the lighthouse was up to par for that day and everything like that. Tough woman. I mean, she was driving cars at 10 years old and driving them off cliffs into the ocean. And back then, I think it was not frowned upon. Today, it's probably not that great. But anyways, so I was born and raised in Marin. My dad swung a hammer. My mom worked at Safeway, which is the local grocery store out there. I don't know if they have Safeways out here, but
we used to when I was younger. Yeah.
Okay. And that was, total middle class family. We didn't, there was never a time where I was starving. I didn't come from any really family hardships or anything like that. But at some point there was a switch that flipped in me, and that made me rely heavily on drugs and alcohol and, ripping, roaring and running. And, I pretty much became an insane alcoholic and drug addict by the time I was 13 years old.
No, I knew it was young. I guess I didn't realize it was that young.
Yeah. Yeah, I was young. I mean, so I started smoking cigarettes probably when I was 7, was like the first time I ever tried a cigarette, and was like, oh yeah, we should do this. And me and my buddies would distract the store clerk. We had a little corner store at the end of our street. We'd distract the store clerk. One of us would distract the store clerk, and the other would reach over and grab a pack of basic cigarettes. Which, I mean, I can say I've actually gone back and made amends and, talked to the owners of the store and all kinds of stuff like that. They were actually extremely hard to track down because they had sold their business. Anyways, that's a different story. So that was kind of, my existence. So I got into hunting when I was really young, obviously family trips and, shooting guns and all that kind of stuff. But coming from Marin County, the biggest thing was you can never tell anybody what we do on the weekends. You can't tell anyone we hunt. You can't tell anyone we fish because it's frowned upon. And we don't want you to lose friends. They were more worried about, the youth in my area being upset with me because I killed animals or, something like that. It was not an accepted family hobby for anybody. And when I grew up there, it wasn't when my mom and my dad grew up, but not later on in the 90s.
Okay.
So, I started getting into smoking pot and, other stuff when I was 10 years old. And by the time I was 13, it was like full blown. We're drinking, old English 40s and, steel reserves in the park and being terrible, terrible kids. We were not good kids, all of us. We were all terrible. And that kind of obviously morphed into its own beast. By the time I was 15, I became a ward of the state of California. I had gotten arrested a few days before Christmas. I was locked up, I think, for 35 days. And then the state didn't know what to do with me. And they ended up sending me to a long-term treatment center in Montana. Not a long-term, it's a 60-day treatment center. But when you're 15 years old, that's pretty long-term.
Yeah.
And I went up there. It was in Kalispell, Montana. It was called Wilderness Treatment Center. It was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. Really got me reconnected with nature. Something that my uncle and my grandfather have said a lot is, nature is my church. And I identify with that to such a deep level inside of my soul, because when I need my healing, when I need to have those conversations with myself, when I need to find the deeper things that are going on with me, when I go spend 10 hours, 20 hours, a week, whatever it is, out in the woods by myself, I mean, I'm focusing on everything, but also there's a certain amount of time in the beginning of that when I'm hashing out all the conversations I need to have with myself until I find that equilibrium and just in silence and solitude. Funny thing, and I'll say this because I always say silence and solitude when I'm in the woods, and I heard this on a podcast fairly recently. Someone was talking about when you're out in nature and everything that you hear outdoors, you're not in solitude. You're surrounded by an abundance of life, whether it's the grass blowing in the wind or the leaves of the trees or the rain falling or the snow falling. I don't know if you've ever been somewhere where it's so silent you can hear the snow falling and hitting the ground, but it's like one of the most miraculous feelings, I think, on planet Earth. Where the river's running and you're sitting there and you hear a fish jump in a lake and there's no one else, you know what I mean? So we're really never alone, or I'm really never alone when I'm in the woods. There's so much other life going on. But just finding that solitude, that time by myself, while I was in Montana and reconnecting with nature, part of the program was was it 16 days? I think it was a 16-day cross-country ski trip through the Bob Marshall in the end of January and the beginning of February. And I mean, the Bob Marshall is gnarly, and it's even gnarlier in the dead of winter. And went out there. We did some peak climbing.
Was it even worse because you were like 15 years old and thinking you had to be there?
No, I mean, actually.
Or were you wanting to be there by this point?
I wasn't wanting to be there. Like when I first got there, I was not really happy, but looking back on it now, I can say that some of the revelations that I had, whether it was, I had this counselor, his name was Pat, and this guy was just amazing, absolutely amazing. He changed my life in so many ways. Like, he would just play with me like a cat plays with a ball of yarn, but like spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And I remember sitting in his office one day, and we were discussing a power greater than ourselves and a God consciousness. And, he keeps pointing out all of these things that are miracles and, amazing things. And I keep trying to skirt them and sidestep them. And I remember, I wish I could remember the exact words he said, but the way he phrased it instantly put me in tears. Like, I couldn't even handle what he had just told me. I was just in utter tears for probably like a good 30 minutes, which was insane. And I don't know why I went on that tangent, but so did the wilderness, the 16 days. And while I was out there, you do a 3 or 4 day, I think it's a 3-day solo trip, and you pretty much live in a snow cave. One person comes out, they bring you hot water. They bring you 16 ounces of hot water in a thermos in the morning and 16 ounces of hot water in a thermos in the evening. And then the rest of the time, you're pretty much fending for yourself. And while you're in this, I built a snow cave and was living in a snow cave for those 3 days. And they give you a questionnaire packet, and it's like basically write down every terrible thing you've ever done in your life to everybody you can think of. And then, you spend your first day doing it, your second day assessing it, and then your third day going over everything and then writing solutions for it. And, things like that really just kind of changed my perception of reality, where I don't think a lot of people have the opportunity at any time in their life, or very few do, where they get to be put in a situation, especially when your mind is that teachable and young. Yeah. To be able to analyze your own life, analyze the decisions you're making, and then finding the rectifiable solutions and, how to correct those wrongs.
And I would say even as adults, a lot of us don't ever do that.
Yeah.
We don't, especially in today's world where, I've talked about this with other people. If, like you talk about being out there in silence and solitude, in today's world, if we're without our phone for 8 seconds, we're reaching into our pocket. We don't know what to do with ourselves if we're,
And I suffer from that myself.
I do as well.
It's so terrible.
Yeah. So a couple things on that. Earlier, you said that you went back and made amends with a lot of the people that you felt you had wronged. Mm-hmm. Was that part of the program, or was that something that you thought you needed to do?
No. So that was part of the program. And okay. So from the time I got out, I got out when I was 16 years old. And from the time I got out until I was like almost 19, I knew what I had to do in order to maintain sobriety, and I knew what I had to do and where I had to be and everything like that. But being a rebel and a hellion and, the terrorist that I was at that age, it didn't fit my mental makeup. So I was out doing all kinds of, I was just involved in things that I shouldn't have been in. And I didn't walk away from friend groups and a whole bunch. I didn't change my life. You know what I mean? I just came back to the same life. I just was no longer drinking or using. And at the end of that, right before I went back to using drugs, I had decided that trying to kill myself was going to be the best solution. And I had several attempts, and I do air quotes for people that are listening, of suicide growing up, just because there was something missing. Excuse me. There was something missing inside of I was lacking a spiritual solution. I was, in my opinion, I was lacking a God in my life, an understanding of a power greater than myself, and trying to fill that void with anything and everything that I'm putting into this void and everything I'm using to try and fill this void, and still finding myself empty inside and there's nothing there. the only solutions that I were coming up with were terrible solutions for myself, including thoughts of suicide. And it wasn't, so I had attempted suicide, ended up in a Alta Bates psych ward for 5150 when I was 17 years old, which that also put a deterrent on me from hunting for a number of years after that. I think it was 7 years or something like that lasted. So when I got out of that, it was like, well, I didn't want to do this. Why did and I remember paging my buddy and I was like, dude, I made this terrible mistake. And he's since apologized, but the entire car and him and I probably hadn't talked because of the path that I had gone down. And his path was sports and my path was extracurricular activities. And he came to my house, picked me up, and gave me a ride to the emergency room so I could get my stomach pumped or drink charcoal. And which they had me drink charcoal, and I would not recommend that for anybody. It's not fun. The whole time, he's just yelling at me, about how could you do this? What are you thinking? And this and that and everything, which was like insult to injury when I'm already dealing with it myself. But he's the same age as I was. He doesn't know. None of us know at that age what our impact is on our peers when we're,
Well, I would assume it's two completely different mindsets too. That at any age, it's hard to get in the mind of somebody that just tried that.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure it's to get to that mindset where you think that's the answer.
Mm-hmm. Is a whole nother bag.
Is a whole nother level that I could, especially like you said at that young age, I'd have to imagine that was almost impossible for you two to understand each other.
Oh yeah. Well, and what's scary is I look at like how youth is today with social media and all the things that happen on Facebook and Instagram and everything like that. And I'm like, man, I don't know if I would have made it through my childhood. Like, I was a skinny little kid. Everybody called me Toothpick. Everybody picked on me. It's terrible. Like, so it's interesting perspective being able to be an adult and look back on it now and kind of have a better grasp and understanding of, the things that we do to our peers when we're kids and the damage that can be done through it.
And I think an important lesson there is too, so many times we think when somebody goes down that path, it's because they came from insert whatever reason, a broken home, they were abused as a child, whatever people typically think. Yeah. But I know I've learned in my own experiences that many times that's not the case. It's,
See, and you brought up something interesting, and you said being abused as a kid, and I had sexual abuse when I was a kid, and then I had sexual abuse later in my teen years, and it was not family. It wasn't like family stuff or any, no immediate stuff or anything like that. It's just circumstance, right? And how do you say circumstance? But that's what it was, and I still to this day don't know if that played a role in any of it, because and I've talked about this with a number of folks, and this is where, because I've been sober for 17 years, right? But I feel like I've reached a limit to where I can get to on my own spiritual growth, and I need to either find a mentor, not a mentor, but like find a deeper way to connect with my own self. And there's a group in California called the Hoffman Institute. They run a pretty intensive therapeutic inpatient program. It's like a 7-day program, I believe. And it's supposed to be one of those programs that it'll dig into your soul as deep as possible and find out what really is making us tick as human beings and as individuals. And that's kind of something that I've thought about. I've thought about going down to Panama and looking into doing like a guided ayahuasca journey.
I was just going to ask that if
I haven't like, and that's where it becomes kind of difficult for me because my intent and purpose for doing something like that is strictly spiritual and a better understanding of myself as a human being. And like microdosing with mushrooms and all that stuff that's like a jazz today. I was doing that back in 2001, 2002 when I was 13 and 14 years old. Like I think my longest time that I took mushrooms, and I was, I was taking like a stem in the morning, and I don't know if any of this makes any sense, but I was taking a very small amount in the morning and then in the afternoon and in the evening, not getting to a psychedelic point, but
not to go down too far down that rabbit hole, but I just read the other day, and that, now you have some major universities that are studying for mental health reasons.
Oh yeah.
This entire
psychedelic and what they can do. And I mean, we can even go, and we're not going to, but we could, you could get into all the stuff that the CIA may or may have not been doing, back in the 60s and everything that was going on with LSD and all the, mind controlled stuff they were trying.
That could be a whole nother podcast.
But I think, because I experimented with all of that. I mean, the only stuff I never touched was heroin or crystal meth. Those are the only places I would never go. And I think that the psychedelics that I took definitely probably unlocked some parts of my brain that maybe wouldn't be open today, as far as my ability to assess and then figure out a solution and then move forward with the solution.
Well, and the thing that's so awesome to me is that you just said it before, you've been clean and sober for 17 years, but you still immerse yourself in a culture like with the flip-flop business, where you're around a campfire, you're around guys that are hunting, that
campfires, parties, you name it.
I mean, let's admit that's what is part of the experiential part that we do there.
Yeah.
And, for you to be able to recognize that and not dive back into that, can you attribute that to like one specific thing? Or, because a lot of times we'll hear, especially with us in the Midwest, people, they'll go through the rehab, they'll quit drinking for a specified period of time, but then it's so easy to get roped right back into that, because it seems to be involved in so many different activities that just go hand in hand. Like for us around here, it's golfing, like you said, sitting around the campfire.
Yeah. Cocktail hour. And so I see it two ways. Sometimes people just unfortunately regress and go right back into it, or they isolate themselves and they just don't put themselves in that situation where they could fail. But like in your case, you would not have your business if you would have done that. Yeah. Well, so the book that I got sober with, in it says, we are more than X number of people who have recovered from drinking, right? From alcohol. And I'm talking about alcoholics predominantly, because that was the road that I took. And in that, they talk about being able to be free and go wherever we want to go and do whatever we want to do, as long as our intent and purpose is of pure nature, right? And I don't feel like my intent and purpose of anything that I'm ever trying to do in my life is malicious. My intent is always of good nature, and it was a learned process for sure, coming from someone who, was a ratty little drug dealer, shitty kid. Like, I had to rewire my brain on how I thought about everything, like I was thinking about this just the other day. Some of the things I've had to rewire, like for me, driving in traffic used to be like a major problem. And I mean, like punching the windshield, screaming and yelling at cars, irate, to the point where like I'm blue in the face, red in the face because I'm screaming so loud. So the best solution for me to come out of that was I need to drive in the slow lane and never get out of it and not pass anybody who's going slower, or just get in there, soak it up, learn how to mentally deal with it and be okay with it until I can drive the rest of the road like an adult and not be a crazy person behind the wheel. And I've taken that approach to a lot of things, you know what I mean? So, and what it has come down to for me is like learning how my brain works, then trying to figure out how to relearn how to do those same things without getting upset about it, you know? And I think that unfortunately there's a lot of adults that could use that in these days. You know, but it's for me, it's been so beneficial to learn that, you know. So fast forward into everything I do and all the people I'm around and drinking and everything like that that's going on. Like, I mean, I haven't had the urge to drink since I don't remember when, you know, it's just not there. When I ended my drinking, we never got to that, but when I ended my drinking, I was, you know, whatever, 18 years old. I was pretty much living out of my car or on my friends' couches. I had totaled my car drunk driving. I was drinking a pint of 151 a day and doing as much cocaine as I could find. And that's where my life was. And I woke up one day and I was like, I no longer want to live like this. Like, this is not the life that my parents want for me. This is not the life that I want. This is not the life anyone wants for me. And I made a decision that day to do something about it. And then with that decision immediately followed action by figuring out, okay, so if I need to take action, this is what I need to do. And I started taking those steps and doing what I needed to do, and doing the things that were suggested to me.
And you were only 19 at this point, right?
I was 19, so I've never had a legal drink in my life. I drank like it was legal for a few years, but I've never had a legal drink in my life. You know, but finding the program and finding everything that I did and taking the steps that are outlined seriously and following through and having action behind what I was doing, as well as going through and making amends, like we kind of discussed a little bit. I think that coming through all of that and coupled with the understanding of a power greater than myself and knowing that no matter what, everything is going to be okay, and having faith in that fact and really trusting that, and coming to situations that baffled me, being like, all right, here you go, guy. God, take this one. This is way out of my hands. You know, just guide me through it, and I'll do whatever you put in front of me. And, you know, because everyone always says God never puts more on our plate than we can handle. And I will attest to that till the day I live, or till the day I live, till the day I die. Because I can say that I've never been put in a situation that was too big that I couldn't handle it. And I've been put in some pretty big, pretty gnarly situations in the last 17 years. A really good one would be my grandma had been dying. We knew my grandma was going to die. Just getting really close. I'd go to her house every Friday. And that was like my visit. You know, I'd drink a root beer, I'd pour her a gin and tonic, and I'd light her a cigarette, and we'd watch golf or tennis or whatever she was watching on the TV. Spend a couple hours with her. Get a phone call while I'm at work, and it's my mom. My mom doesn't call me at work, so I'm like, okay, something's not good. Answer the phone, and she's like, you need to get down to Marin General immediately. Your dad has had a full heart attack, and he's in the cath lab right now getting surgery. And she's like, your brother's already on his way up. He'll be there in 5 minutes. My brother picked me up, and we drove down to the hospital. And because of where I was at in my life, I was the one that was, okay, you need to call this person. You need to start making the phone calls. You need to start taking care of all of the business and everything like that goes along when a family member's possibly going to be dead by the end of the day. He had a widowmaker heart attack. He died in his wheelchair on the way up to the cath lab. They brought him back to life, and then he died again. He flatlined again in the cath lab, and they brought him back a second time. And obviously he was with me last week in Montana, so he's still kicking.
That's incredible.
It's incredible. It's totally incredible. I mean, that's a miracle in itself. And his dad had died relatively young of a heart attack as well. So, you know, I made it through that, you know, and then I think 3 weeks after that, or maybe a month after that, my grandmother died, and I made it through that. And, you know, those are just examples.
You draw on that sometimes, though, as like when things do get hard, that, hey, I've made it through that.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I've been through, a really gnarly breakup that went absolutely seamless. Like after a 5-year relationship, you'd think that it would be like an insane breakup.
Yeah.
But for both of us, because of where we were both at and because of the tools that we both picked up along the way, we were able to have a completely peaceful breakup. No fighting, no screaming, no yelling, no hatred, no anger. Just, okay, we're going to both go our separate ways and we'll separate our life and it's okay. And, everything was all good. And all those things are all, for me, what I can look back on and know the person that I was, know how I was looked to in different situations, and know that that's firm bedrock that I can have a great life. You know what I mean? No matter what happens, I can have a great life.
So do you because I know a lot of your business is traveling all over the country, meeting new people, which would be very difficult for a lot of people that have a lot of anxiety, going into a new environment.
Anxiety, for sure.
So do you still, but is it a different type of anxiety or something like after I've been through, this is nothing?
Yeah. I mean kind of, definitely.
I mean, because after everything that you've been through, in and out of, the treatment and all that, I would imagine, like you said, you still get anxiety, but that you can probably draw on past experiences and be like, I'm lucky to be here.
Oh yeah. Well, and a big part of the program that I was in, that I was involved in, was a lot of public speaking. So, I think the biggest crowd that I've ever spoke, and I think I spoke for like an hour and a half, was maybe 1,500 people, and you're on a stage in a 3-piece, looking dapper and, giving a, lecture or sharing, whatever you want to call it, for an hour and a half. I think some of that kind of stuff broke it. But still to this day, I'll get anxiety about different things, but I process it different and I work through it, and I don't let it get the best of me anymore, where I used to let it get the best of me. And I used to it would hold me back and it would keep me, filtered, or, you know what I mean? I just wouldn't be able to be my true self. And I think also part of the growth that I've had in the last 17 years has been understanding who I am and being comfortable with myself, that hey, if that person doesn't like me, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That affects my life in no way whatsoever. Everyone doesn't have to like me. Some people like me, some people love me, some people don't like me. That's just life. It's always going to be that way. And being able to roll with those punches and still have fun and still enjoy myself. Because there was times in life where even if it was somebody I didn't like, if they didn't like me, it would ruin the next 4 days of my life, just because it was, in my head, it held that much.
Just keeps replaying.
Yeah, totally. And being able to separate myself from that and divorce myself from those feelings and emotions and being like, okay, that's cool. No big deal. Let's keep going.
And the one thing I've learned about that is you can waste so much energy trying to appease those people that are never going to like you.
Yeah.
And then you skip right over the people that like you and love you because you're too worried about making this one person happy.
Yeah. Which isn't going to make any difference anyways.
No.
Yeah.
And you said something else in there that I think was big. A lot of times you'll always say that we're, one decision away from, a different life or a different outcome. But you said that earlier. You said you were one decision, but then you took action.
Yeah.
Which sounds like what you still do when you have anxiety. You process it differently, but you just take action to overcome it.
Yeah. Well, action is so important in everything we do, because I always like this one, right? There's 3 frogs on a log. One of them makes a decision to jump off. How many frogs are left? Well, there's 3 frogs still on the log. Only one made the decision. It's a decision. He didn't take any action. So we can make decisions all day long about what we want to do, But if we don't follow that up with vigorous action immediately after, there's nothing gets done.
Yeah.
I mean, I can make a decision that I'm going to clean my garage today, and I can still be on my couch watching Netflix at 8 o'clock at night. And my garage never got
no
cleaned
cleaner.
up. Yeah.
So do you think that was really instrumental in, like, as you started out? Because obviously entrepreneurship is very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It's very tough to do. But were you able to apply to a lot of those same principles as you started?
Oh, yeah.
I guess let me back up there a little bit. So, now you're going all over the country cooking.
Mm-hmm. Been on today was my 65th flight.
Yeah, we talked about that.
For the flip-flop guy. Not for myself, but
for the flip-flop guy.
For the flip-flop guy, 65 flights this year.
So, like, how did that kind of start and evolve that, you went from cooking in Marin County to next thing, you're doing this for like guys like Don Jr.
Mm-hmm.
or, high level people that I've heard them say it's the best wild game they've ever had.
Everybody that's ever tried it has told me that it's the best wild game they've ever had. And that's, you were with me today when that guy sent me a picture of the buck that he shot and the leg that he saved. And shortly after that, there's a group of guys right now up in around Great Falls, Montana, who are doing a cow flip-flop tonight with, 20 of their closest friends.
Did you have a vision for this when you started? That it would get to this? Or did you just take action day after day and it's slowly...
So that's a really good question. And so I'll say my first step into what I'm doing now, Kuyu was doing their last garage sale, and it was the last one they ever had. I can't remember what year it was. And I was like, hey, I'd love to come and cook a deer leg in the parking lot. And they were like, yeah, whatever. But sure, come on out. Right? And everybody loved it. Everybody had a great time. And back then, when Kuyu used to do this, they would have a line of people camped out on the street for like a mile or 2 miles. It'd be like an iPhone release, but it was a gear sale for hunting equipment, for hunting clothing, apparel. It was an apparel sale. And that was kind of like my first, big break. And for me at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was just going to do something that I loved to do. But it knocked the doors off of every single person that was an employee at that company.
And like, how many people would have had that idea but never taken the action to call somebody there and say, hey, let me come do this?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and for me at that point in my life, like I had organized a lot of different events. I'd been planning events and organizing events for maybe like 12 years probably. And at all those events, like if they were campouts, I would show up to these campouts and I would build a kitchen and I would cook breakfast for 200 or 300 people that were at these campouts and these events. And I'd go to Costco, I'd get 10 dozen eggs or, whatever I needed. I would just go get the amount of food and I'd just cook breakfast. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. and start cooking. And so cooking has kind of always been something that I love to do. And then obviously when I started doing flip-flops at my parents' house, I'd do like 50 elk burgers, a deer leg. We'd have abalone appetizers going around, smoked salmon from salmon that my dad and I had caught and smoked it and all that kind of stuff. But so going to Kuyu, that was my first time. I'm going to go do this for a total group of people that I have no idea who they are. I know very few of them. Excuse me. I think at that time I'd only met Jason once or twice. Jason was the founder.
Jason Harrison.
Yeah, he was the founder of Kuyu. He's also one of the founders of Sitka as well. And so that was like my first. And instead of random Marin people or like non-hunters, cooking for a group of people that love wild game and they know wild game and they hunt wild game all over the planet.
And a lot of times those people also are pretty confident they have the best way to prepare and cook their wild game.
Yeah. And little does everyone know I'm sitting on this landmine. So yeah, I showed up and cooked, and everybody loved it. And then there was an event shortly after that. A couple of my buddies in Redding, California, they host like a, what do you call it? Like a convention or whatever you call it. We were just talking
like a trade show.
Like a trade show. Thank you. God, I couldn't find that word for the life of me. And they were doing their private party at their house, and they invited me up, and I was like, cool. Well, I'm gonna bring a 20-pound deer leg, and I'm gonna cook it for everyone. And they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, trust me. Just, it's gonna be the best thing you've ever had in your life, I promise. And they're like, yeah, whatever, dude. But sure, come on up. And they were there. There was a bunch of other people from the outdoor industry that were there because they were all at the trade show. And my one buddy, he owns a company called Deadeye Outfitters, and they do like hats and t-shirts, apparel, hunting stuff, but just on like the fashion end of it more so than, like a DC or something like that. And they had me come over, and my buddy looks at me and he's like, I don't understand what this kid from California is about to do with that deer leg, but the convention just ended at 7:30. We're not eating that meat until midnight. Like, this is terrible. And I think in less than a minute and a half, I had a hot piece of meat on the end of my blade in front of his face. And he looked at me like, what? What had just happened? Because he'd never seen anything like it in his life. And him and everybody else there all tried it, and they were just like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever had in my life. And then I went down, and my buddy Jeff Rowley owns a knife company. He's a professional skateboarder. And he opened up a knife company in Southern California. Went down there, and we were doing a little party down there and cooked some deer legs down there. And we did elk tacos and a whole bunch of other odds and ends. And everybody there was like, this is the best wild game I've ever had in my life. And it just started rolling forward. And then Yeti had me come out to, where did I do it first for Yeti? Yeti had me come out to their house at the Western Hunt Expo in Salt Lake City. And I did it for them. And that was the first year I had ever cooked for Yeti and their hunting staff and everything that they do. And then they just were like, all right, you're coming out to this event, and then we're going to do this next event and this and that and blah, 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 blah. And it's just rolled forward, like straight, nonstop.
Just, it's awesome. I mean, and like now I see that, we talked about this a little bit earlier before we started recording. You mentioned that not everybody, they enjoy the taste of wild game or the community aspect of doing it, but not everybody wants to hunt. Mm-hmm. So if I understand correctly, you now through your website offer
deer legs
that make this process a whole lot easier for a lot of guys.
So I was actually very fortunate. I got linked up with a fellow by the name of Jake, and Jake runs a company called Maui Nui Venison. And Jake's whole concept behind Maui Nui Venison is 100% conservation for the for the Hawaiian Islands. And any island that has an axis deer problem. And they're an invasive species out there, and they're taking over the islands, and they're completely destroying ecosystems, bays, estuaries, rivers, plant species, you name it. Like the axis deer out there have completely taken a toll on the island. So what he has developed is a company called Maui Nui Venison, and it is, as far as I know, the only 100% USDA approved wild game sold in the United States. And I worked out a deal with him, and fortunately for me, he loves what I do and is in full support of it. And they cut legs off. They'll save me hind legs, and I have access to sell them. I sell them. They're $4.99 shipped to anyone's door, 2-day shipping anywhere in America. And shipping's included in the $4.99 price. It's a 15-pound. It's an approximate 15-pound. Every leg weighs a little bit different. It's a 15-pound Axis deer leg. We're looking at one right now. It's sitting on the table in front of us that we're going to cook tomorrow. And I mean, everybody always raves about how Axis deer is the best deer. So what a better opportunity. And I'm extremely picky. I could work with a farm. I could work with, a lot of other places. And I'm all about wild game. I'm not about farm raised animals. So very grateful that Jake has given me the opportunity to be the only provider of Maui Nui bone-in Axis deer legs.
And we'll put the links in our show notes and stuff, but is your website just the Flip Flop Guy?
Yeah, it's the flipflopguy.co.co.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll put that on there, and we'll, obviously put your Instagram and everything.
Yeah.
But where do you, we talked about this a little bit earlier off air too, but where do you see this business going, or where would you like to see it go?
I mean, my dream, right, and this is why this is my dream. So I was a hunter's education instructor when I lived in California. The preservation of our American tradition of hunting, and I guess a world tradition of hunting, is extremely important to me, and passing on the tradition to the next generations, and making sure that hunting is always there. There's always a renewable resource, and that those privileges and rights are never taken from us. Along with hunting, obviously, comes gun rights. And I fought with a couple different organizations in California, and tried to help lead charges on stuff going on with gun rights in California from 2010 to 2014, when I was burnt out and couldn't deal with it anymore. I mean, back then I was building AKs, ARs, 1919 belt-fed machine guns. Like, if I could build it or try to build it, M14s, if I could try to build it, I loved guns, So we're getting into the full spectrum of what I'm trying to do here, right? Is wild game is becoming so popular, and it's becoming so important for people's nutrition and their diet, and healthy, edible food that doesn't have hormones. It doesn't have all this extra stuff going into it. And what I'm trying to do is give people the opportunity to eat wild game, not only eat it, but eat it in the best presentable, social way that they could with all of themselves and their friends. Now, if everybody in America, not everybody, but let's say, whatever percent of the barbecuing population, or people who love to throw parties and cook a lot of meat, start doing flip-flops in their own backyard, and everybody loves wild game. Well, let's say those parties are anywhere from 30 to 50 people. And let's say at every single one of those parties, everyone's a non-hunter, but they try this. And then they want to look into how can they do this and get it themselves. And then instead of buying it from a store, they can go out and they can buy a rifle or a bow. Excuse me. The squirt's just...
I was just going to say that.
Making me go. Lost my train of thought. So 3 or 4 or 5 people from each one of these parties decides now they want to get into hunting. And we can start repopulating. And everyone always says, oh, we're a dying community. We're not. As far as I'm concerned, hunting is booming more than it has ever boomed. That I can think of. I mean, in California alone, we couldn't do enough classes to keep the amount of people that were trying to do hunter's education. There was no way that we could keep up with the demand for classes in order to put through enough students.
And I think, you have guys like Joe Rogan, obviously, that promote that, and, I think he's probably responsible for a lot of people wanting to get into whether it's bow hunting. I can
tell you, everybody in California that came through, and they weren't kids. They were 25 to 35-year-olds. And everybody that was coming through was Joe Rogan or Cameron Hanes. And that was their main influence on why they wanted to get into hunting. They listened to the Joe Rogan podcast. They heard about it. They watched videos, whatever. And
I think a lot of that is the approach that they take, where they're not doing it as like an apologist.
Yeah.
They're just like, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm filling my freezer. It's the healthiest meat I can eat. And they're not making excuses of why they're going out to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you completely. Completely. Like there's no way around that. So if me selling these legs can influence people to get into hunting and stop buying legs from me, I don't care if they're filling their freezer and they're doing their own legs. That doesn't matter. The purpose for me behind all of this is to expose more people to wild game, the amazing food that can be procured from it, and how delicious it can be, the fun they can have while they cook it and prepare it with their closest friends and family, and then also be able to tell the adventure of the animal that they took while they're cooking it and feeding everyone. And, like I said earlier, I've sat down with vegans and vegetarians, and they'll start out like, I'll never eat that. And 30 minutes in, they're coming over like, okay, maybe I'll just have a slice, and they break decades of whatever oath they took or vow they took to never eat meat, just because they're hearing the story of the animal, they're hearing the pack out, they're hearing everything that's going on, and they want to be a part of that adventure, and that's, I think, a lot of, what can help us bridge the gap from the hunting community to the 2A community, all the way around the board. And that's what we need. We need that.
And I would completely agree with that. And I think even bigger picture thinking thinking about that is if you look at like how it helped you from
a crazy drug infested life.
It gave
me life.
Gave you life.
Hunting brought me back to reality. Hunting made me the man that I am today. Nature and the outdoors and the processes that we go through as individuals and humans in the field, climbing up over that next ridge with a pack on our back that's full of 100 or 200 pounds of meat, and making sure and going through the emotions that you feel while you're doing all that. And all that brought me back to reality. And I think that is a huge contributor to why I don't need to drink and why I don't need to, go back to drugs or go back to alcohol or anything like that.
Just an amazing story. And I
appreciate it.
I'm honored to call you a friend.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I had a chance to get to meet you at Winter Strong.
What a wild time that was.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, we had 9 deer legs going at once with 150 people. I never had seen anything like that in my life. That was so
when we saw him hanging there, we're like, we have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah.
And
there's just 9 legs strung up off a ladder in a tree.
Yeah. And like I said on the drive up here, I don't know how many pounds, but I'm pretty sure it's in the pounds that I ate that night, but is by far the best wild game meat I've ever had.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank Bert Soren enough and Soren X for, what they contributed. Bert went out when he called me and asked me about that. And he was like, I want everyone cooking a leg. I was like, we're going to need 10 legs. And he was like, I got you covered. I was like,
you probably made his day when you told him that.
Yeah. I was like, all right, man. All right. And I think the last one, I can't remember, but he got it done. And
it was delicious. There's no other way to describe it. The whole experience. I want to say thank you for coming and doing this. Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. It's going to be great. We're going to expose our entire team and their families to the flip-flop method.
Yeah, we got 2 legs to cook. That's a lot of meat, man.
Well, I hope they're hungry.
Yeah, they will be for sure.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. If you can do us a favor, leave a review, have suggestions, let us know at podcast@volquartsen.com. Thank you.